Hey guys, so in this one, I'm hoping the title is not just cheeky. Well, the title is cheeky, but the idea may actually be legitimate. I Yeah. So I have been thinking about procrastination, and I haven't been thinking about it. Because if I'm a true procrastinator, then I've been procrastinating on thinking about it. Um, I'm haven't been thinking about it. I've thought about it in the past. Haven't thought about it recently until just now before I started the video. Obviously, I wouldn't make the video if I hadn't been thinking about it. But in any case, the potential logic behind procrastination might actually be pretty good. And this isn't just a way for me to justify my own laziness, although it might be. I don't know. I may be unconsciously justifying my own laziness, but um, in any case, what is the potential logic behind procrastination, and is there a logic behind procrastination? And could it be beneficial in potentially unforeseeable ways? My answer to that question is I don't think so. I don't. Generally speaking, if you're procrastinating on work, like tasks, then probably it's really not advantageous. Generally speaking, you're packing, defining work as suffering, right? You are, which they may be equivalent functionally. Defining work as suffering, compressing too much work into too small amount of time produces a lot of suffering and even more so. So the more work, defining work as suffering, the more work that you compound into a small period of time, um, the more suffering you compress into that time. And the more that and the compression itself adds suffering on top of all the suffering that would initially be there anyway, because it produces the stress of needing to get something done in needing to get more done in less time. And that produces a psychological stress. Whether or not it's valid is another question. Regardless, um, generally speaking, defining work as suffering is, not uh, if the work that you need to do is equivalent to suffering, then compressing it into a smaller period of time is actually not advantageous and ultimately causes burnout, which is why people suggest doing things incrementally, which is probably the best suggestion. And but the potential logic behind procrastination is if I start studying too early, if I start my work too early, particularly studying or thinking about something too early, I will learn that thing and then forget that thing by the time the test comes. However, if I strategically delay my study, right, until slightly later in the semester, although not at the very end, my attention, my functional retention, and my useful levels of retention may go up. So retention may ultimately improve in terms of its translating into test performance. So the logic behind procrastination is that it's not really that wise to get everything done. So a lot of people will assume, oh, well, if I if I procrastinate, right? So I shouldn't procrastinate. I shouldn't compress everything into the last minute. Then they'll assume that they should compress everything into the first minute. So they'll put an equal amount of stress on themselves and burn themselves out anyway, because there's a psychological cost to work, which renders burnout if that cost accumulates too rapidly or at too high levels. So we have to manage that burnout effect, and it's to the extent that it's got something to do with neurotransmitters and how dopamine gets reuptaken into the brain, and your motivation and interest chemicals get exhausted, and you exhaust those neurotransmitter resources. It's what you call burnout, and that can set you down for. I mean, that can definitely impair you for a good amount of time. So it's ultimately more efficient to avoid all the burnout entirely, which produces more inefficiency rather than more inefficiency and less efficiency. You thus can, but the idea that, well, I shouldn't compress it into the last minute, so I'll compress it into the first minute is ridiculous as well. But then you just get burnout earlier. And then, so I don't know. The potential logic behind procrastination is if I start studying too early, I'll forget it by the time the test comes. And if I start studying too late, well, then I probably won't retain it and it will impair retention. But for the sake of retention, it's probably a good thing to put off essential learning until the midpoint of the semester, not at the very end and not at the very beginning, but sometime around the midpoint, depending on how many hours you plan to work a day. I don't know, but there is logic to the delay which defines procrastination. And so at least that's how I think about it. Now, that's not to say when I say that I'm not justifying laziness or anything like that. I'm saying that we have to be strategic with when we decide to expend a lot of energy that defines our hard work. So managing energy as well as time is a very important thing. The issue with if energy is effectively managed, productivity goes down, and so it's all about maintaining the ability to work as much as possible and not risking that burnout, which could take, it's going to vary depending on the individual, but it could take a substantial amount of time to recover for something like that. So, yeah, and then the burnout reduces the interest in the thing that you're studying, and so ultimately there are long-term effects where you begin to resent the thing that you once were passionately interested in. So passion can be transmuted into resentment, or can devolve into resentment, and that ultimately sets you behind. Now, I parenthesize behind. Parenthesize is a word. I parenthesize behind because the idea of procrastination as being behind really, in many ways, strategically procrastinating puts you ahead. So, because it just improves test performance and retention generally. Thinking about it from a utilitarian and a strategic perspective, some amount of procrastination may actually be advantageous. It's just everything has to occur within a balance when it comes to these types of questions of action. So, yeah, but there are definitely people that assume, okay, I can't compress it into the last minute, so then I'll compress it into the first minute. Is illogical and ultimately results in burnout anyway, which is what they're trying to avoid by managing their time in the first place. So, ultimately, I would define efficiency as the reduction in pain, and by making something more efficient, we reduce the pains taken to accomplish something. And so to improve the efficiency of a task is to increase the ease with which you can complete it and decrease the pain that is associated with the task, if there is any. Oftentimes in life, tasks do have some pain attached to them, depending on what the tasks are. If you're dealing with bureaucracy or some other bureaucratic tasks tend to be very tedious or whatnot. It may not be painful for everyone, but if you find those tasks tedious, there's going to be some pain attached. Not physical pain, but some amount of psychological discomfort. And maybe there's a difference between pain and discomfort, but using one word is easier than using two, so that's kind of why I just used the word discomfort. But in any case, maybe you all have some interesting thoughts on procrastination and whether ultimately it's advantageous if done within a context of balance. So that's it.